Reginald here, and welcome to part 2 on my chain weapon deep dive. To start off with, I want to quickly summarize what we came away with on the last video. Then we can hop into the meat and potatoes of the balance conversation, which is what we're really all here for today. And lastly, I have some new idiosyncrasies for you, so stick around to the end for a few tips and tricks on how to use the chain weapons. In super brief summary, and if you want the whole details, go to the previous video. The Chain Axe Heavies are too bonky. Chain Axe Heavies need more rev and rev carryover. Chainsword light attacks are too bonky. Chainsword Heavies are bonky. Chainsword Heavies need more rev carryover. And heavy Chainsword light attacks have bonky visuals. My summary of solutions was as follows. All heavy attacks need more dismemberment, Chain Axe and Chain Sword heavy attacks need more rev carryover, and all light attacks now do latching, shred attacks like the Chain Axe Light, so, that thing that sticks you to the target. The bonkiness on heavy attacks was not something I was able to address, and I'll leave that up to the Foley experts over at Fat Shark to figure that one out. I think they can do a better job than they did, and I am confident that they will do a good job because they've done such a good job on all the other weapons. Okay, you're up to speed. Let's jump into the meat and potatoes of the conversation, which is the balance discussion. About a month ago, I put out part 2 of my series of videos on aggressive weapons testing. This is a series I'm doing where I actually take the weapons and test them according to an experimental protocol that I use to determine their relative balance with one another, and I've done quite a lot of weapons at this point, including other classes and builds. In that video, I outline a balance paradigm based on JTC Live's proposed paradigm with a few tweaks of my own. Let me summarize that here to maximize our use of time. Number 1, this is a PvE game, so balance can be a bit more relaxed. What that means for weapons is some weapons can be better than others, and that's okay. But what weapons should be better than others is the question that automatically arises, and the answer is the weapons that are better than other weapons according to 40k lore. The second item is don't invalidate player input, and what this really means is that no weapon, from our perspective, should be so good that it invalidates the use of another weapon. This is currently a problem in Darktide, and there is going to be a bit of a balancing act here, since we want some of the things to be quite a bit more powerful than other weapons, while also still leaving room for them. An example of a good balancing act that has been accomplished lies in the MG12 lasgun versus the bolt gun. The MG12 lasgun is a great everyman rifle that does really well at shooting shooters and killing a large number of targets. It's a good gun. The bolt gun, the iconic weapon of 40k for ranged weapons, is also a really strong weapon. It's honestly almost in the range of OP on some targets, but it has balancing difficulties like low magazine size and difficulty with aiming due to recoil that make it worse at the jobs that the MG12 is good at. An example that's not working all that well is the power sword versus the chain axe. If someone's using a power sword and I'm swinging at the same Poxwalker horde as them, I literally can't build Slaughterer stacks because I kill things too slow, so my weapon never gets going and they just kill everything in a few swings. I'm not asking for nerfs here, everybody calm down. Assuming you're familiar with Darktide and the current state of the game, then these examples should be sufficient to explain the point I am trying to make with item number 2. Item number 3 is that personal skill showcases matter. JTC Live describes this as clutches, and that's a great example, but I want to talk about weapons here, and so for me, personal skill showcases revolve around the weapons being harder to use, but giving some benefit for learning to master them. Chain weapons are constantly described in the lore as being hard to use, hard to master, with whole schools dedicated to their teaching. So it seems to me they're the perfect candidate for this kind of balance. We can get into exactly what I mean there when we get into the special attacks and the light attacks, but I think that's sufficient to catch you up even if you haven't seen any of my previous videos. The problem, as I see it, is that chain weapons don't hit any of these 3 core balance proposals. Despite being 40k weapons that are supposed to be better than mundane weapons, they're typically worse. They are invalidated by other meta weapons, and so you can't actually use them appropriately if there are other weapons around that are better than them by enough, and personal skill showcases can't show up because the weapons are so bad that even if you're doing very well, it really only meets the level of other weapons. Alright, so chain weapons are bad. What's new? We all know that one. Let's get into how to make them better, and we're going to do that by referencing all the data I've gathered from the aggressive weapons testing videos and data set I've been working on. One of the things that's immediately evident when you grab a chain weapon for the first time is that the special attack seems like the whole weapon. Most of the rest of the attacks feel quite lackluster, but the special attack feels great and is effective against just about any target you swing it at. And I am hardly the first person to notice this, identify this as a problem, nor call it to attention. But the problem in precision is that the weapon itself seems to be worse in order to make room in the balance design that Fat Shark has proposed here for the special attack to be good. I don't think that's good balance. I think that's actually really bad balance, especially in the case of chain weapons. And there's two very good reasons for that. The first is that this is a core 40k weapon. There's no reason for the whole weapon to be worse just for the special attack to be good. This weapon can just be a little better or much better than other weapons. That's okay. And number two, and really this is the strongest argument here, the special attack is self-balancing based on its own enormous drawbacks. Chain weapon special attacks are on the far end of the expensive spectrum when it comes to time usage. Those rev attacks take time to queue up, you have to activate the special, then you have to queue up your swing, whether that's a light or a heavy, it does take time to wind that swing up, then you finally hit the target, but you usually don't kill it on the first tick of damage. Having not killed it on the first tick of damage, you're going to saw for some amount of time while you're completely exposed to other enemies around you. All of those drawbacks are truly enormous, and they cost you the most valuable resource in any horde shooter, which is time, and they risk your health bar as well. Now, the benefit you get, of course, is an outsized damage and the ability to stagger any single target that you're attacking, so I'm not saying they're bad, I actually rather like these attacks, but I still occasionally have conversations with people today that say, oh, you can't use the special attacks on the Chainsword, they're just too unsafe. You can't use them in a real game. And like, you absolutely can. I do it all the time. But it's a personal skill kind of thing. You really have to learn when and how to use these, or you're not going to get away with it. But the point I'm trying to make specifically here, the key detail of this whole argument is not that they're bad or good, but rather they're perfectly fine, but they are a closed loop of self-balance. They don't need to be accounted for in the balance of a chain weapon. They're already hard enough to use on their own for the benefits that they have. So, for the rest of this conversation around balance, we're going to be discarding the factor of special attacks. Yes, special attacks can reach up and touch those big boy crushers way better than most other mundane weapons can, but they already pay enough to do that. They don't need to be accounted for. With that foundation block in place, we can have the rest of this discussion a lot more easily. But let's just touch on a few key problems that the chain specials have right now that I would like to see addressed before we move on to the rest of the balance discussion. Number one, Chainsword heavy attacks, when using the special rev, actually deal a different damage profile than all of the other attacks, and it's a better damage profile. As mentioned in my previous video, Chainsword special heavy attacks are actually doing a high tick of damage on first hit, followed by a couple of lower ticks of damage, and then they spike again at the end. All of the other chain special attacks, including the Chainsword's light attacks and push attacks, deal a practically zero value, around 20 damage or less, for the first tick of damage, and then rev their way upwards with a couple of like 150-ish ticks until they hit the last tick of damage, which does big damage. The end result of this is that your heavy Chainsword, fully revved, can get stuck in a Poxwalker and rev for the whole rev attack. That's dumb and bad, so let's get rid of it. There's no good reason for this. Number two, we're going to end or extend the auto-off behavior. So chain weapons will sometimes just turn off just as you're about to hit them because you revved it up, but you had to wait a second for whatever reason. So you go to hit that crusher or that bulwark just as they're about to hit you because you want that nice stagger, and you just hear a loud thump instead of a revved attack connecting with your target. That's not any good, that's not any fun. It mostly has to do with the duration of how long the chain special stays active. I think it's too short. We could get rid of it altogether. We could go to something like the hammers do. I'm going to leave that up for grabs, but let's make this less annoying. There's one last thing that's really hurting these weapons, and that's no regs. Unfortunately, this is a common problem across a lot of weapons, but with these big, high commitment attacks, they're really noticeable when you get a no reg. Everyone knows about this problem, so fix it, Fat Shark. It's driving us all nuts. Now that we have cleared special attacks all the way off the table, let's get into light attacks, then heavy attacks, and then we'll come around to some proper balance discussion. For light attacks, as already described a few times, we're going to be adopting the latching behavior that does 2 ticks of damage for all of the weapons that are chain weapons. That goes for the chain sword, that continues for the chain axe, and that goes for the heavy chain sword as well. Now, I know that's not going to be popular with everyone, but I want to pick up a conversation that I put a pin in the last video. Here it is. But the big thing I want to call back to is my balance videos for my various aggressive testing paradigms. I specify some balance norms I want to achieve, and one of them is based on JTC Live's proposed proposals. In this particular case, the one I want to call out is number 3, which is that personal skill showcases matter. When I see someone running around with a chain axe, I already know they're a good player, generally speaking, because they're having to use a weapon that is already a bit worse than most other weapons. It also has several difficult to use attacks, like the light attacks and the shred rev attacks. And this is an unusual opportunity for player skill to shine through when using a weapon that is actually harder to use than other weapons in melee combat. That can be a lot of fun and is worth keeping around and expanding upon. So, as mentioned, special attacks are already hard to use, but light attacks being hard to use is pretty unique, and also very interesting. It's one of the things I like so much about the chain axe. Whether they figured it out on their own, or they watched my videos to learn how to do it, the chain axe lights are actually rather satisfying once you figure them out, and they're hardly so unsafe that you can't use them in a game. As already mentioned, in 40k lore, chain weapons are so difficult to use that they have whole schools dedicated to teaching how to use them. And as it happens, my whole channel got its start teaching how to use chain weapons. That's basically what I do. If you think about it from that perspective, I have a school that teaches the use of chain weapons, and the only reason that works or is interesting to anybody is because they're hard to use, and there's something challenging about them mechanically, but they can be used once learned. Rather than running away from that, rather than making it easy and casualizing a difficult gameplay experience, lean into it. Make the weapons hard to use, make that a feature, not a bug. Make it fun and cool, but that's where the balance discussion comes in. See, everybody knows the light attacks on the chain axe actually aren't that good. They're not very strong. They're fun to use, but they have a lot of problems. In fact, they're about 100% too weak, because you need Headtaker and Slaughterer to make them feel good, which is ridiculous. I mean, I just want to reiterate this point. They're hard to use because, as attacks, they latch onto the target, preventing you from moving, blocking, or doing anything else for at least the time it takes to get the second tick of damage, like a tiny rev attack. I did my best to do some quick one-to-one comparisons using common weapons that I have available that are of excellent quality with good blessings. Obviously, we'll get to my big data set in a second, but just bear with me. If you were to look at 3 weapons and guess which one did the most headshot damage to a Dreg Bruiser, would you pick the Tac Axe, Chain Axe, or Antax? Well, personally, both on visual appearance and the 40k lore, I would pick the Chain Axe, but guess what? It's the lowest when you consider a roughly 1-to-1 comparison. The Antax swings for 386 on headshot with no buff stacks at all. The Tac Axe, swinging twice against headshots on a Dreg Bruiser, gets 311 damage out of the 149 for the first swing and 162 for the second swing. The Chain Axe gets 126 for the first tick of damage and 134 for the second tick of damage, netting 260. Minor error there. Actually, the right Chain Axe is 161 plus 151 for a total of 312. But my point still stands. Keep in mind, for this measly damage, you are losing control of your camera and losing control of dodges and blocks for the duration of that second tick of damage. Literally, what the fuck? Without some kind of event recorder, it's pretty hard to analyze with just video, but tactical axe attacks and chain axe attacks doing 2 ticks of damage each are nearly 1-to-1 on how much time it takes to get the 2 ticks of damage out of them. And what this means for the chain axe, at least, is until you start building stacks of buffs up and get really going, you're going to be hitting bruisers and shooters 2, maybe 3 times if you miss a headshot. While I am stuck with Headtaker 3 for my chain axe, since I'm just doing Headtaker for this 1-to-1 comparison, I'm not going to worry about the extra 5% of damage because it won't take me over the bruiser breakpoint of 450 HP anyway. In any case, at maximum stacks of Headtaker for all 3 weapons, you get the following values. Tac Axe gets 215 damage per headshot hit for a total of 430, which breaks the 2-shot mark for a bruiser. Chain Axe gets 165 plus 191 for 356, and the Antax was one-shotting so hard I just started hitting maulers in the body for 446 damage, which cleans body shots on bruisers just by itself. Keep in mind, this is all light attacks, no heavies. But wait, Reginald, can't you just use Slaughterer instead of Headtaker? Why, yes you can, of course you can. Slaughterer is, of course, the better blessing, only you have to actually kill something to trigger it. And that's a bit of a bigger problem than you think. See, if you're using heavy attacks, you're going to knock stuff away. Sometimes that Poxwalker you hit the first time won't get back up and come back at you for quite a while. And if you're using light attacks, it's going to take you 2-3 swings to kill one Poxwalker. So you're kind of going to be hurting for a bit there too. And that's not even accounting for other people sniping your kills. So you could do what I've always done, which is stick Slaughterer and Headtaker on the thing. And then of course I'm using Rising Conviction with my Zealot, and you're getting pretty adequate results at that point. Only you enter a new problem. See, if you go back to the previous video and we look over how the weapons were designed, especially the chain chain axe, it's pretty clear that the light attacks are meant to be your single target workhorses, and the heavy attacks are supposed to be these cleaving blows for multiple targets, and then the special attack is for your big boys that you need to take out. But when you put Slaughterer and Head Taker on a weapon and you get close to max stacks, your light attacks start cleaving enemies like bruisers despite their high hit mass. And this creates a totally new problem where now you're doing way less damage to the first target hit with your light attack, which is for single target work, and then doing the shred attack on a second target. But if you're like me, you did not pick Slaughterer and Head Taker for the radical departure in cleave performance on the light attacks. What you were hoping for was just more damage. This radically changes the behavior of the weapon on light attacks, and of course heavy attacks to some degree, and that makes the weapon weird to use. And I hope you can see where I'm going here, which is that if you actually do this with all the other weapons, you make these light latching attacks a thing, and they have really abysmal damage, just like the chain axe does, you're going to be in a bad way, because the other two weapons that I proposed putting this on don't have Head Taker or Slaughterer. They don't have plus power blessings at all. And even if they did, the radical departure in behavior on light attacks isn't desirable for most cases. Or if it was desirable, you'd at least want to be able to choose between the damage and the behavior change. You don't want to have both attached to one another. Alright, so here's my proposal. Light attacks of all stripes between any of these weapons for the latching behavior need a lot more damage, based on the weapon not attached to any plus power blessings. And it's totally fair for them to have an outsized damage profile relative to normal attacks because they cost a lot of time and safety for the user. Okay, so what are we going to do exactly? Well, I am not a balanced math wizard, so I'm going to be a little cautious here and just say these are my broad recommendations. I think it's okay for someone who's better at this to just, change the numbers to meet their standards. In this case, I'm going to hazard a specific number. So the tack axe with max Head Taker 4 stacks on headshot for a Dreg Bruiser can get 215 damage. So my proposal is as follows. The chain axe should do 215 damage on headshot with max Head Taker stacks, no Slaughterer, and the second tick of damage, the shred, should hit for 322. That is 1.5 times more. And the reason it should be 1.5 times more is because you need an outsized benefit for the outsized risk you're taking. The second proposal here is about Slaughterer and Head Taker. Slaughterer and Head Taker are plus power blessings, and the way that works is they are equal parts damage, cleave, and stagger. And that is really difficult to work with because it dramatically changes not just the damage, but also the cleaving behaviors. I want to change that. I want to take the damage out of Slaughterer and Head Taker, and I want to put it onto the chain axe. I want Slaughterer and Head Taker to only add maybe 1% per stack of damage, but they can still add all of the cleave advantage they got before. This would turn Slaughterer and Head Taker into more utility blessings that help change the cleave behavior of these weapons, rather than having them change the everything about these weapons. This would give more room for other blessings to breathe, but still give you a small damage advantage if you want it on Head Taker and Slaughterer for when attached to your chain axe. Though again, these don't exist so far on the heavy chainsword or the chainsword. And I know maybe those sound a little contradictory because I didn't account for Slaughterer when I was doing Head Taker's calculation, but just we could throw away the extra values where it doesn't make sense for the balance of the weapon, but something in the range of 5 to 600 damage for 2 ticks of damage on a headshot against flak armor is probably sufficient for the chain weapon's singular light attacks. Also, I'm still expecting carapace armor to be a gating effect against these light attacks, and of course still the heavy attacks. I don't want them to change all that much against carapace. It should be the thing that gets in the way and says, use the special attack. And 5 to 600 damage for a single light attack is not that ridiculous when you consider the latching behavior and the fact that with Head Taker, it's easy enough for both the antax and the tack axe to get into that range. One last thing, we need to make sure that the returning light attack on the heavy chainsword pattern, so when you go heavy 1, it's a cleaving blow, when you return light, it's also a cleaving blow, that should retain its non-latching behavior so we don't ruin the weapon. That doesn't have to apply to that same swing on the light combo though, so we could just have an effect when you go from heavy to light to heavy to light. It could just be that instead of when it's in the light combo. Just to summarize, just in case I lost somebody in the mess of all this, we are going to pull damage out of the Slaughterer and Head Taker blessings, and they're going to be more cleave focused in terms of how much percentage they add. They'll add a little damage, but we'll reduce the amount that they add to the weapon. We'll put most of it on the weapon, and it'll land somewhere in the range of 5 to 600 when everything's all built up. And that's how light attacks are going to perform on most of the weapons. They should probably perform more on the heavy chainsword than on the chainsword. I'll let the balance experts tweak those values to make them feel good and distinct, but that's kind of the direction I want to go in. And this takes light attacks and turns them into the more idealized kind of single target attack, where you can use plus power to change their behavior if you want to. Alright, now I know that was a lot, so thanks for bearing with me. That was the most complex discussion in this video. I'm actually going to do the heavy attacks fairly briefly. It'll be easy. In my previous video, we established that heavy attacks are for cleaving horde clear work. And a couple of their key problems were that they needed better sound effects that were a little less bonky, and that they needed to have more dismemberment. Now, you may have been seeing some of this background footage and realized there's a lot of dismemberment going on. Well, it turns out, like most of the things in Darktide that I don't like, there's a mod for that. There is a mod called For the Blood God, and it allows me to specify that for heavy attacks and light attacks, dismemberment should be amped up. And guess what? It looks awesome, and basically I was right. Now, I don't think heavy attacks need to do anything special against heavy armor. The special attack is there for that. They can kind of just be bad, just like they are on normal mundane weapons that aren't axes. It's really in the horde clear domain against bruisers and lighter that they really should be doing more. Again, the style paradigm that we're going for is that heavy attacks are your cleaving horde clear attacks. So the plan should be very simple. Let's just take heavy attacks and make them good at that thing. In my data, you can see that the attacks that I used in most cases were heavy attacks when fighting hordes. So for the Chainsword, I want to take it from where it is up here and bring it down here, right in line with the Catchup. The heavy Chainsword should be the Zealot's best horde clear weapon, so we should take it from up here and move it way the heck down here. The Chain Axe should definitely be the worst at horde clear amongst the chain weapons, so we should move it from here, where it's in the horrible red zone, and down to here in the yellow. It shouldn't be in this garbage state unless it has these two top-of-the-line power blessings. Let's do a summary of the plan. With the exception of that one return strike for the heavy Chainsword, all of the light attacks now have latching attacks. I'm open to the idea of the Chainsword having faster tick rates than the heavy Chainsword and the Chain Axe, just to make it a little bit different to play with, and maybe in exchange for that could have a little less damage. But all of them should be dealing very competitive damage with the equivalent light attack for, say, the Axe. The damage has been moved off of the blessings and onto the weapons themselves. This is mostly important for the Chain Axe, which just needs that. Heavy attacks are now competitive, horde clear weapons that match any other mundane weapon for time to kill against a horde, which makes these really strong weapons, if a little hard to use. And then the special attack comes in to allow us to reach out and touch those big boys with big armor with a lot of risk to ourselves, so it's its own microcosm of balance we don't need to worry about. This makes chain weapons harder to use than mundane weapons, but definitively better in terms of their ability to reach out and flexibly deal with any other target. Note, I also haven't changed any of the dodges, dodge distances, speeds, or anything else. The weapons are still a bit slower to swing around and harder to move around with. This means that the niche for mundane weapons is that they are easy to use, and they have specializations that they're very good at, typically horde clear, but some of them are a little better at armor busting than others, like the axes. And mundane weapons are safe and highly mobile while doing so. Meanwhile, chain weapons sacrifice a lot of safety to do more flexible work against more targets for a lot of damage, or at least competitive damage with any other weapon on the table. The only real outliers now are force weapons and power weapons, and I'm just not going to touch those in this video because they're a whole mess to deal with. Alright, we did it. Chain weapons are good. Hooray. That was a lot of work, but we made it. But did you also know that chain weapons are weird? See, Chastise the Wicked does some weird stuff to chain weapons. Very weird stuff. When using the special attack on the chain weapons, it's not an entirely well-known detail that if you use Chastise the Wicked after you hit your target, you do a lot more damage. But if that wasn't idiosyncratic enough for you, that's actually not entirely true. For some targets, it's better to use Chastise the Wicked before. This was discovered thanks to a conversation I got into with one of Reginald's Redemptionists, Discord members. God, say that 3 times fast. Little Mond, or Mond as he goes by in-game. As it turns out, when we got to testing this together, Chastise the Wicked does more damage against crushers and also against monstrosities if you activate it after the first tick of damage. Notably, the final tick of damage does big damage. However, this is not true for maulers and other flak armor wearing targets, which is pretty bizarre. If you hit a mauler or another flak armored target with Chastise the Wicked after you've already hit the first tick of damage, you do perfectly appreciable damage. It's more than without it. However, if you chastise before you hit them, you actually do quite a bit more. So big shout out to Mond for helping me test that out and sending me all the recordings of that work so I could upload those here for everybody to learn about the weapons on. And if you would like to come over and join us on Reginald's Redemptionists Discord, you can come do that at the link in the description below. We're happy to have you there, and actually there's a really cool YouTuber there by the name of Cash Crop who also uploads some fabulous stuff, so you should go over there and subscribe if you haven't already. As with any original video, bad news if you thought I was done there, because I try to be thorough about my complaining. There are 3 other problems with the chain weapons that I didn't mention, and I'm going to get into them right here. Number 1, there's no two-handed chain axe yet. I need that. I need my name on it. I need a special skin for Reginald's Redemptionists on the chain axes. Both of them. There needs to be 2 chain axes. The chain sword is too small. It's like a chain machete, or a chain blade is even in the lore somewhere. So, you know, like, look at this thing. I mean, this is what the chain sword looks like, and this is what a chain sword should look like. I'd like to see new patterns of chainsword that are actually chain swords, not chain machetes. They could have more of a longsword style profile, maybe be swung with one hand most of the time, but 2 hands for heavy attacks, things like that. It could be a lot of fun to have both chain machetes and chain swords in a game. Lastly, and most importantly in my opinion, is there's no eviscerator in Darktide. Now don't get me wrong, I'm very impressed with Fat Shark for pulling the heavy chainsword back out of obscurity. It's basically been non-existent anywhere in 40k since the 5th edition rulebook. So don't get me wrong, that's cool. I'm glad we have a heavy chainsword in Darktide, and I like the weapon, and I would like to see the weapon get a little bit better so that I can enjoy the weapon. But there's no eviscerator in Darktide, and this thing that might have been called the heavy eviscerator just isn't anywhere close to one. On the Darktide forums, in a thread on the chain weapons that is very much the subject of these videos, a fellow by the name of Weeping Moon did some design work to try and, make some eviscerators and chainswords look better. Take a look at this and tell me this isn't what you wanted to see when you saw the word eviscerator. And I'd just like to describe how I think this thing should be used. It should mostly fire an overhead from the shoulder for light attacks, and otherwise not really have any kind of combo. It just sort of hits the ground and you have to pick it back up. Heavy attacks should be swinging blows that are just absolutely swinging for the fences. They cleave through everything under the sun, do a ton of damage, but are just so uncontrollable. You just swing this thing and it practically spins your character around. Blocking? What's that? At best, maybe you place this thing on its nose on the ground and just use it like a shield. The special attack is a micro chastise where you leap at the target and then hit them with an overhead that saws through them and doesn't stop sawing until the target is dead or you're dead. And if that sounds dumb to you, that's exactly the idea. I want this weapon to be an absolute disaster to use. It should be absurdly hard, self-sacrificial as all get out, and it should be a ton of fun because it should do absurdity in terms of damage and exploding enemies and you name it. And that would be absolutely iconic, which is totally important. And if you don't believe that's important, then I would like to remind you that the Ogren Grenade Box exists. Eviscerators aren't just built different, they're built stupid. Alright, with that, we have solved all of the chain weapon problems that I could dig up and reasonably achieve accurate solutions for. I'm sure there's something I missed, but I'm satisfied with what we have here. It's been my pleasure to tackle this issue, and I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with me while I've done so. I really do hope you'll hang out with me again in the future, so if you like the work I'm up to and the things I'm doing, make sure to subscribe and like, and if you comment on the video, I will respond to you. That's a thing I like to do, actually. It's really fun for me to have conversations with everybody. And other than that, I think I'll call this a wrap. I'm going to be mostly working on stuff for October, since there's going to be a bunch of new players coming by and needing to learn how to play the game and use different weapons, so I hope that this will influence the game in a proper direction for the chain weapons, and otherwise I'll be doing my best to teach new players how to play the game for a little bit, and then maybe I'll tackle that product review I've been wanting to do on Total War. With that, I will just say have a lovely week, a lovely month, and I will be seeing you around. Take care, and bye-bye.